The 27th of February 1943. Hardangervidda Plateau, Telemark, Norway. Wind razors across the open snow, hissing through dwarf birch like a whispered warning. First Lieutenant Joachim Rønneberg tightens the strap of his rucksack, breath fogging inside the wool scarf as he studies a map shielded by a mittened hand. Beneath the auroral haze, 6 silhouettes rise from the drift skis shouldered, ice crust glinting on their webbing, each man listening to the same sound, the pulse of the Rjukan Gorge ahead, where the Vemork power station hums through the dark. They have waited 2 weeks for this, since dropping from a Halifax out of RAF Thamesford onto this frozen tableland, a clean, black plunge into darkness and snow. Now the hour has come. He counts them as any officer would. Second Lieutenant Knut Haukelid, older, watchful, the man who can read mountains the way a navigator reads stars. Sergeant Fredrik Kayser, the quiet one, steady hands for fuses. Second Lieutenant Casper Idlin, eyes always moving. Sergeant Hans Storhaug, broad-shouldered strength, the sort of man who can break trail when the drift comes waist high. Sergeant Birger Strømsheim, taciturn, precise. 6 men beside him, each trained through Britain's Special Operations Executive and under his command for gunner side. Their ages track with the thinness of their faces, 20-something lines cut by cold and hunger. The plan is simple because it must be: find the hidden way into the electrolysis cellar and destroy the heavy water plant without a shot. They are not alone on the plateau. Waiting somewhere in the white, 4 Norwegians, the grouse team, have survived a winter of near starvation and a failed glider attempt that killed the men meant to do this job months earlier. Rønneberg still feels the chill of that news when he first heard it in Scotland. 2 Horsa gliders, both crashed. Survivors executed under Hitler's commando order. And yet grouse stayed. Their names are a litany of resolve. Second Lieutenant Jens Anton Poulsen, Second Lieutenant Knut Haugland, Sergeant Claus Helberg, Sergeant Arne Kelstrup, local men who can disappear in the fjell and reappear with a rabbit and a smile. Tonight they have the last pieces of what Gunnerside needs: timings, sentry habits, where the snow is wind, scoured enough to carry a man's weight. Dusk burns down to graphite. The rendezvous is a low, dark hut, snowbank roof like the curve of a buried whale. The door opens to lamplight and the smell of peat smoke. Helberg is first to clasp hands with Rønneberg, his cheeks hollow but his grin wide. On the plank table, a rough sketch of Vemork, the River Mona cleaving the gorge like a cut from a black saw. The suspension bridge, 75 meters of German-guarded wire and planks, is a trap. The sentry rhythm is reliable, but the dog will smell you, the snow will betray you. Helberg taps the sketch, shifts to a scratched line lower in the gorge, a less obvious path where the river ice crusts, a shelf of rock, then a service way that can be reached if men move like cats. It's possible, he says, if we go quiet and go low. The room breathes a moment in silence, and then it is decided. They pack as the light dies for good. Explosive charges are wrapped against their chests to keep them pliable. Pencil detonators tucked into an inner pocket where the spring won't lose its temper to the cold. Each man carries a personal weapon slung beneath his cape, some Stens and Colts. A British Thompson that no one speaks about now but will matter later, but the plan is to use none of them. A pouch of chocolate is shared in pieces so small they seem ceremonial. Rønneberg checks his luminous watch face, hands aligning with the window of least patrol movement guesstimated by grouse after weeks of observation. One mistake in the gorge will be a broken neck. One mistake in the cellar will be the end of the war for every man here. He says it softly, almost conversationally, and the men nod as if discussing weather. The Norwegian way of courage is to wear it like a sweater. Practical, unshowy, warm. They step out into moon-scattered snow, skis whispering. The plateau falls away gradually, then suddenly, wind rises in the throat of the gorge and throws fine crystals into their faces. Ropes are uncoiled. Kayser goes first, boots feeling for ledges hidden by snow lip. The suspension bridge above is a black stripe against the sky, with a single bulb glowing like a low star. A sentry coughs, metal clinks. Below it, where the Mona twists, the ice groans. Haukelid tests it with his pole, listens, then points to a thinner line where current keeps the water moving. They skirt it, breathing through their noses, feeling the hour slide under their feet. Halfway down, the gorge tightens. Rock wall to the left, ice-slick river to the right, a shoulder-wide path between. Storhaug eases his pack through and passes the line back hand over hand. Somewhere up the slope, a dog barks twice and is silent. Rønneberg's breath hits his teeth like glass. He thinks, not for the first time, of the men waiting on the other side of this night. German soldiers from the fore. Grenadier Regiment garrison at Rjukan. Local collaborators. Eyes trained to the bridge and the track, but not to the deep seam where rock and river meet. That seam is where they must become shadows. The serviceway, if it is still there, should slope toward the plant's lower levels to a door that feeds the belly of the electrolysis cascade. The plan inside is precise down to footsteps. 2 men to set charges on the cell lids. 1 to watch the door, 1 to handle the fuses, 1 to carry the wrong clue if reprisals come after. Then out the way they came, and fast over the snow, into the mountains, and away toward Sweden, where a border is not a line on a map but a 300-kilometer promise. If it holds, if they hold, the gorge bends, and then the plant appears, a colder darkness within the dark. Windows blacked, turbines rumbling under their boots like distant thunder. Vemork sits on its ledge as if carved there, a fortress of concrete and steam. The men crouch in the last shadow before they must break cover. Rønneberg lifts his glove and 5 heads bow close enough for their breath to make a single cloud. Ingen lighter, he whispers no sounds. Kayser's hand settles on the satchel. Idlin's eyes count time. Haukelid's gaze fixes on the black mouth ahead where the service door might be. A gust knifes through the gorge and then dies. The watch ticks. The choice is made. The watch ticks. The choice is made. They move like ink along the seam where rock meets river, shoulders brushing the cliff, ice hissing under hobnails. A narrow catwalk appears half buried, rime-furred, forgotten by the men above who trust their bridge and their routines. Rønneberg points 2 fingers, and the file breathes forward. Haukelid scouting the shelf, Idlin and Storhaug easing the coil of rope, Kayser and Strømsheim with the satchel that matters more than any rifle. The turbines thrum through the stone, you can feel it in your teeth, a slow iron heartbeat. A fence looms from the dark, a blacker geometry against the night. Strømsheim kneels, gloved hands finding the padlock, then the thin kiss of steel on steel. He works by feel small movements, breath held until the shank yields with a damp click. The gate opens no more than a palm width. They slip through sideways, pack scraping frost, then seal the gate and leave the lock hanging as they found it. No trace until it's too late. The service door is a gray rectangle in a gray wall, unlit and rimmed with frost. Kayser tries the handle from habit, ready to step away and make other plans. It gives, unlocked. A gift from routine, or carelessness, or the night itself. Rønneberg looks once to Haukelid. The older man's jaw tightens the mountain's version of a nod. Inside, the air is warm and tastes of damp metal. Pipes crowd the ceiling. A single bulb buzzes and surrenders a thin yellow halo that makes the men's eyelashes sparkle. Boots touch concrete like a prayer. The corridor bends left. A second door head chocked with a bit of wood, some shiftman's shortcut. Beyond it, the hydrogen plant breathes. Tall steel cells lined in ranks, cables draped like sleeping snakes, condensate dripping in a steady patter into the floor grates. The target is here, the heavy water electrolysis cells with their delicate guts and precious inventory. Kayser's hands, the ones the others trust, lift the satchel onto a knee-high pipe cradle. He thumbs open the flap and reveals the inward light of a different kind of winter. Plastic, explosive, rolled, thin as pastry. Det cord coiled tight. A nest of time pencils that look absurd little brass stems with glass ampoules and wires. 2 teams, Rønneberg whispers. Casper with me. Fredrik on charges. Birger to help. Hans to door. Knut to watch. It's the voice of a man who has practiced this sentence enough to make it sound like a weather report. Men ghost to their places. The room rearranges around purpose. Storhaug slides back to the corridor and listens to the building like a hunter at a den mouth. Haukelid takes a position near the entry, coat collar up, eyes resting on everything and missing nothing. Kayser peels a slab, presses it to the first cell's valve manifold, and warms it with his palm until it clings. Strømsheim works the next one, and the next small, precise applications that will punch out nerve centers, rather than tear the room to shreds. Short fuses, Kayser mouths, seconds, not minutes. He cracks the first-time pencil, the ampoule inside snapping with the faintest tick. A coiled spring chews slowly through a thin wire, counting down in silence you can't hear. He pinches the detonator into the plastic, tests the seating, Strømsheim mirrors him. Method becomes chorus. Press, pinch, check, move. A footfall in the corridor, not Storhaug's weight. A shape stalls at the entry, the silhouette of a worker with a lunch tin and a wool cap pulled low. He blinks at Kayser, at the satchel, at the black shapes crouched among the steel. A hand rises Rønneberg's calm and open. Ikke rop, he says softly in Norwegian. Don't shout. Dur trig. Dette militart. You are safe. This is military. The worker's mouth opens, closes. He looks at the floor tiles as if they might tell him what to do. Haukelid is there suddenly, steady as a tree, palm out, voice low as a lullaby. Leg deg ned fem my nutter. Ingen blir skadet. Lie down for 5 minutes. No one gets hurt. The man's tin hand shakes once. He sets it down, lies prone, cheek against concrete, and stares at the path of a stain that looks like a river on a map. Kayser, back to work, kisses the fuse into place. 1, 2, 3 small charges on key cells that will chain reaction the rest. He is quick, not hasty. Calm is the currency here. Rønneberg crosses to a control console and glances at the dials as if they're a clock he can read. Time dilates too slow, too fast, until he feels it reassemble around the room. Enough, he breathes. Out. But there is one last thing. As planned for weeks and practiced in Scotland, with a broom closet and chalk lines, a calling card to guide the blame toward London, away from Rjukan's neighbors. Island produces it from an inner pocket, a British Thompson magazine, clean and unmistakable. He leaves it where a German investigator will find it and write a narrative that spares a village. Storhaug signals with 2 fingers movement above, voices traveling the bridge or the gallery too distant, or perhaps the building is playing tricks. Either way, the moment has shrunk to its necessary size. Kayser sets the final pencil and nods. The time is measured in heartbeats now. They move as they came, shadows peeling away from steel. The worker on the floor squeezes his eyes shut. Haukelid steps backward into the corridor without looking away, then turns and vanishes into the yellow bulb haze. The door gives a soft complaint as it closes. The hallway air is cooler. The outside handle turns in Rønneberg's palm and stills his remaining warmth. They are over the threshold and into the yard when it happens. The building exhales in a single low-bellied thud, then another metal snapping, steam screaming through new wounds, glass turning to grains that chime on concrete. The sound rolls down the gorge and rebounds off stone like distant artillery. Above, a shout. On the bridge, a lantern swings crazy arcs. Then the siren starts, an animal howl that sends fingers of ice up a man's spine. Nord, Rønneberg snaps, and the file becomes a streak. The fence swallows them, the padlock hangs exactly as before, the catwalk glitters with scurf, the river winks black under torn ice. Storhaug is first across the narrows, hands on the rock seam, boots blindly trusting the path his body remembers. Idlin follows, Kayser, after Haukelid, watching their tail. The siren and the turbine heartbeat and the gorge wind blend into a single rope that seems to pull them up the slope. Only when they hit snow does the world widen again. Skids thump down, straps bite into leather. Breath fog turns to banners behind them. Below, searchlights sketch white geometry into the gorge and find nothing but fury and fog. Up here, there is only the hush that comes after a bell is struck. A long, vibrating silence that is not silence at all, but a promise of pursuit. Keep it, Haukelid says just 2 words, but everyone hears the rest. Keep your rhythm, keep your breath, keep your country. Snow takes them back up, out, and away until the gorge is only a black seam vanishing under clouds. The siren fades to a wounded animal's moan. Then wind replaces it, a constant rasp along the firs. Skids bite, poles tick, straps creak. Rønneberg sets the cadence he learned in Scotland, and as a boy in Ålesund, count your breaths, count your strokes, keep the machine moving. Idlin ghosts to his left flank. Storhaug drags the climb like an ox. Strømsheim's pack sits square and heavy with what little food they have. Kayser keeps glancing back, measuring the distance to the last shouts in the first searchlights. Haukelid watches all of them, and the mountain, and the ways a storm can change a man's plan. Behind them, the first waves of response are already crossing the bridge boots, ringing still, orders snapping in German. Vemork's lower windows spew a boiling white that freezes to glitter on the snow. Somewhere inside, Men are finding the cellars and the void where the heart of the plant used to hum. Far below the ridge, a motorcycle grinds into gear. Even without seeing it, you can picture the pattern. Cordons thrown across roads. Checkpoints sprouting like mushrooms. The small hours turning to a gray morning full of armbands and questions. By noon, thousands of troops will be combing Telemark, field gray threads pulled tight through valley and farm and woodlot, looking for 6 shadows stitched to the snow. They do what mountain people have always done when hunted, disappear into size. The plateau opens like a white ocean, gently breathing. Tracks are a language. They write a phrase and let the wind erase it. When it won't, they double back and drag a spruce bough to brush their passing clean. They avoid frozen tarns that thunder under a man's weight and favor the wind-scoured ridges, where snow is thin and squeaks under the steel edges. A reindeer fence looms out of fog. They follow it for 50 meters, then leave it without crossing because soldiers follow fences and dogs find crossings. At noon, a sledge appears on the horizon like a ship, teamster hunched, scarf iced to his beard. He has a name they won't repeat and eyes that weigh risk with a glance. He passes a parcel down without meeting anyone's gaze. Hard bread, fat bacon, knitting needle, thin strips of dried reindeer. Rønneberg slips a message back one line. Fold it twice. Then the sledge fades into the mirage heat of a polar Sunday. The men eat while moving, cutting bacon with a clasp knife against a ski pole, chewing until warmth returns to their lips. The first sweep comes in the afternoon, dots along a distant ridge, glittering bayonets, a flare that hangs too long. The saboteurs flatten among dwarf birch and listen to a geometry of commands. A patrol blunders within 30 meters, boot nails ringing a different note than hobnails on crust. The wind shifts. A dog lifts its head, tests the air, and whines. Kayser's hand settles on the Thompson's receiver by reflex, then eases away. They are not here to fight a war with 6 men. They are here to vanish, to make the enemy swing at ghosts until his arms are heavy. They travel in a pattern learned on night marches. One leads until his legs lose their fireless rhythm, then peels to the back and lets someone else break the crust. On downhills, they keep distance in case a hidden drift catches one and throws him. In the blue hour, when a man's thoughts slow and become simple, Storhaug falls no drama, just a long skid and a laugh through snow-crusted teeth. Island's pole hooks under his pack strap and heaves him up with a grunt. Tack, Storhaug breathes, and they move on. By the second morning, the search has swollen to a manhunt. Roadblocks bite at every lane. Farmhouses are visited by polite men who do not wait for answers. Telephones ring with questions about blankets and strangers and the smell of cordite that might be nothing. Orders from above are clear. The commandos' order echoes in every boot heel, and the forest hears it and stiffens. But the plateau is big and the winter bigger. The hunters find tracks that lead nowhere. A hole where men slept and left nothing. A burned match with no name. Just after dusk, the gust front of a storm walks over the shell and erases half a county in a single sweep. It is the best ally a skier ever had. That night, they talk about the line ahead that is not a line but an idea. Sweden. In the glow of a candle hidden behind cupped hands, Rønneberg traces a route on a map that is fur soft with use east to Øst Telemark, then on and on. 5 of them will push the long miles to the border. British kit under Norwegian wool, British weapons wrapped in oilskin. Haukelid will break away and stay because the fight here is not yet finished, and because someone must tend the fuse that has only just been lit. Day follows, night follows day. Boots crack, then mend under tape. A thumbnail goes black. They thaw the time pencils they didn't need under armpits and joke that they should donate them to a clockmaker. Once, in a low valley where the river twists in black ropes through white banks, they see a German half-track parked on a farmer's bridge and choose the long way 4 kilometers upstream to a ford of snow-choked stones that will keep their tracks in broken water. Once passing a hay barn, an old woman steps out and studies them as if choosing apples. She says only good velsigna dare, and they answer tak, and leave nothing but the memory of 6 silhouettes moving like the shadows of crows. On the 4th day, a patrol shot cracks air to glass 50 meters behind them. A tracer hisses and dies. The men do not sprint. They switch to a climb, a little too steep for comfortable pursuit. Heel risers up, rhythm absolute. The second shot misses by more. The third never comes. Somewhere below, a corporal curses the slope and thinks of the lunch he did not eat. They measure progress in small victories. A ridge gained without slipping, a spruce where wind dies and a man can feel his hands again, a mile eaten while the brain idles in the blankness of cold. They say little. The sounds are practical, a binding knocked free of ice, the sigh when rations come out, the quick swallow when a sip of water turns to slush in a canteen cap. Strømsheim hums, or maybe it is only the turbines they left behind, still vibrating in the jawbone. And then, pine that smells different, dry and sweet. The terrain gentles, then rises in the particular way of the border hills. A marker stands with its top wearing a white cap, black letters half buried, the world beyond it a softer gray. No sentry, no shout, just the ache of the long effort suddenly having shape. They cross into Sweden like men stepping into a photograph and out the other side. There is a hut and a stove that ticks as it warms, and a woman who boils water and scolds them for the state of their socks. The first cup of hot coffee is so strong it brings tears to a man's eyes. 5 will go on to Stockholm with the taste of iron and pride in their mouths. One Haukelid turns his face back toward Telemark and the plant that will not stay dead for long. For while the cellar is smashed, machines can be mended with time and men. The Germans will try and try again. Later that year, great squadrons from across the North Sea will come grumbling over Rjukan in formation and leave Vemork a broken geometry proof that the Allies mean to end this business everywhere, not just in a cellar. And when the Germans try one last trick, moving the heavy water under guard and in secrecy across a deep, black lake, Haukelid will be waiting with a different kind of answer. November 16, 1943. Rjukan, Telemark, Norway. The valley is a funnel for sound. First comes a far tremor like a train you can't see, then the whole sky seems to vibrate. Children on their way to school look up and point, mouths open. On the heights above the gorge, the black bulk of Vemork sits braced against the rock as contrails stitch bright seams across the thin winter Sunday. Low in the valley, a siren tears itself hoarse. Doors bang. Women pull children by the wrist, feet sliding on hard snow toward a shelter newly poured in concrete just weeks earlier. The first fortresses go over B-17 seconds in clean, square boxes, bomb bay doors yawning. A second wave follows, tighter, louder. Each ship looks close enough to touch. In the factory yard, men vault railings, stumbling on slag and ice, shouting each other's names. Above all of it, falling specks grow tails. When the bombs hit, the gorge multiplies the sound. Windows rattle from Rjukan to Mal. Dust boils up past the catwalks. The mountain sends a shock back again as if answering. The raid is massive, over 140 flying fortresses in daylight. The kind of kinetic daylight punch only the 8th Air Force can throw this late in the war. Many bombs go long or short. In a valley like this, precision is a prayer. The plant is damaged, yes, but a cruel fraction of the load falls across the town. A new shelter takes a direct hit. By evening, the casualty lists are being written in hands that can't keep steady. 22 civilians killed, houses smashed, neighbors wandering with gray hair full of plaster dust. The plant stands, battered. The community buries its dead. 2 days later, the valley air rumbles again. This time, they're B-24 Liberators, 35 of them from the 392nd Bomb Group out of Windling Station, 118, a long pull-up from Norfolk across the North Sea and the tooth-edge coast of southern Norway. Frost furs the cowlings. Crews count the minutes to the IP and peer through gun sights gone milky with cold. The run is long, the winds unruly, but they drop, then turn for home with tanks that feel suddenly too light. The men in the valley learn to read the sky, where the lines of smoke point, how the echo comes back from rock. The damage accumulates into a decision. German engineers can patch pipes and fit new cells. They can thicken guard rosters and drape wire. They cannot move Vemork out of the crosshairs. Berlin decides, abandon production at the plant and move what they have. The remaining stocks and key equipment south to Germany. The heavy water will travel by rail, and where the rails end, by ferry across the cold, black depth of Lake Tinn. News of that decision arrives the way news always does in occupied towns. In a whisper first, then as a rumor with names attached, and finally as a certainty with dates. Knut Haukelid, the one who turned back toward Telemark while his comrades skied to Sweden, listens to it settle in his mind like a gear dropping into place. He has carried the after image of the cellar blast in his bones for months. He has watched the plant limp, then stagger, then breathe again. He knows that smashing rooms is only half the work. Stopping movement, that is the other half. Now movement is the plan. A train to Mal, a ferry from Mal to Tinneset, then rails again toward Notaden and farther, toward a Reich that dreams of reactors moderated by the very liquid wrung from this valley's power. Haukelid begins to count the variables the way a sapper counts seconds. Loading schedules, shift patterns on the quay, how the lake behaves in February, which ferries sail, which mornings. Who knows a crewman, where a man can crawl unseen. Winter hardens. Along the quay at Mal, steam breathes from the stacks of the railway ferries, SF Ammonia, SF Rjukan, and the one with the name the valley will never forget, SF Hydro. Rail wagons clank over iron, guards stamp feet and swing arms, rifles on their shoulders. Telemark can feel when a thing matters to the occupier. The German presence thickens around the schedules like fat on broth. Haukelid moves with the patience of a man back in his own element. He recruits quietly, Knut Hansen, Rolf Surley, and keeps the circle small even by resistance standards. He wants no gunfight, no traded shots across the deck. He wants physics on his side, depth as an ally, cold as a witness. The plan he sketches is like the Gorge path at Vemork, simple because it must be: get aboard Hydro unseen, place a charge where steel is weakest to control how a wound becomes a mortal wound, and set the clock so the ship will be at the lake's deepest, darkest spot when time runs out. On nights when frost paints the ferry rails white, Haukelid and Surly practice in their heads what hands will need to do by touch, crawl spaces, the skin of the hull, how to lash a line for leverage when you can't swing a hammer. The charge will be plastic explosive, the same brutal putty they learned to mold in Britain, and the fuses will be simple and deniable. Alarm clock mechanisms, the kind a policeman squinting at salvage wreckage might mistake for any civilian device. Above all, the timing must be kind, cruel to steel, but merciful to people. Place it so far forward that, when the bow floods, the screws rise free and the rudder loses bite. The captain will still have a minute of steerage to turn for shore, even as the lake takes weight. Set it for a Sunday run, when fuel workers ride the car deck. Pray for calm water, pray too, for time. Meanwhile, the official German story moves along the rails. Manifests, seals, drums marked with codes that mean more to chemists than to soldiers. Some barrels will float if hold half full, alkaline, tricky so the story, should it need telling later, will be muddy at the edges. But the core is clean. What leaves Mal must not arrive at Tinneset. In a valley still counting its dead from November, the ethics of that sentence are not abstract. Haukelid knows the faces on the quay are his own people's faces. He maps the plan against that knowledge and makes the only choices a man like him can make. Set the timer to put the ship over 400 meters of water. Keep the blast small. Give the crew and passengers as much chance as physics can give. The lake, cold and impartial, will decide the rest. By mid-February, the pieces align. A Sunday crossing, a cargo that matters, a watch pattern with soft seams. In the dark spaces under Hydro's car deck, where condensation drips and footsteps thud above like distant drums, a hand will press explosive to steel and another will twist the key of a clock. The lake will do what lakes do, and in the quiet moments before that, somewhere in a Telemark kitchen with the lamp turned low, Haukelid will check a pocket watch and say nothing at all. February 20, 1944. Lake Tinn, Tinnshore, Telemark. Dawn stains the mountains, the color of cold iron. On the quay, at Mal, locomotives cough and settle as railway wagons clank onto the ferry's car deck, timbers creaking, couplers knocking in a patient rhythm. A guard in a gray greatcoat walks the line with a pencil and a clipboard, breath feathering. Barrels and slatted crates are strapped inside two wagons, their stenciled codes as blank to him as the lake's surface. Passengers hunch in scarves on the upper deck Sunday coats, 10 lunch pails, a string bag with rye bread, a wool blanket rolled tight against the railing. In the wheelhouse, the telegraph clicks to slow ahead, and SF Hydro noses from the pier, its funnel writing a neat black sentence on a white page. Somewhere below, among condensation and pipe valves under the car deck, steel holds a secret that will tell itself on schedule. The night before, 3 men moved like shadows through the yards: Knut Haukelid, Knut Hansen, Rolf Surley working by touch and breath beneath the ferry's ribs. They had studied tide and timetable, crew habits and patrol routes. They had argued about ethics in kitchens where the lamp was turned low. The answer they carried was plastic, explosive, needed warm, and an alarm clock mechanism set to measure mercy in minutes. Place the charge forward so the bow will flood first, still buoyancy, and give the captain a last chance to turn for shore. Set it for a Sunday crossing when there are fewer souls aboard. Then close the tool bag, thank the darkness, and walk away without looking back. You can hear Hydro's screws bite when she clears the key. A deckhand chips ice from a rope eye, mutters about the cold. A child peers between slats at the train wagons and asks his mother why a lake needs a train. On the car deck, a Norwegian conductor checks lashings on the wagons and rubs his palms, the way a man does when he's counting without numbers. In the mess room, a machinist spoons porridge and glances at the clock. Out on the main deck, 4 German soldiers stamp their feet and smoke. The smoke pulled flat by the headwind. The lighthouse at Erdeland stands ahead like a pale thumb. Beneath everything, tucked where bilgewater listens to steel, a spring gnaws a wire in a small brass body and shortens the morning. The lake is deep here, 430 meters of black water that can keep a secret longer than a man can hold a thought. The captain, his hands stained with coffee and winter, keeps Hydro on a steady line toward Tinneset, feeling the north wind's press on the cheek of the vessel. Somewhere to starboard, ice rattles in the shadow of the slope. Somewhere to port, gulls turn like scraps of paper against the sky. There is nothing in the sound to warn a human ear of what steel already knows. The clock inside the fuse decides when the story changes. The first shock is not a bang so much as a wrenching thud, the kind felt in teeth and boot soles. Light bulbs tremble in their sockets. Somewhere, a mug skitters. A hiss becomes a roar as the 4 compartments drink the lake. The bow settles in a long, dreadful nod. On the bridge, the telegraph slams to full ahead, and the helm turns for short instinct and seamanship, reaching for the same hope the saboteurs left them. Crewmen race to lifeboat tackles that have frozen hard overnight. One strangles in its grating, another swings free, bangs a handrail, and a minute becomes a thing with edges. Passengers look at one another and at the angle of the deck. "Hold the child," a woman says, and then says it again without meaning to. On the car deck, wagons groan against their chains and shift a hand's breadth, enough to make men jump as though the steel itself has anger. Above, the list bites steeper. The deck goes from slant to slope. A German sergeant barks and then swallows his next word when the ship shivers. There is no panic on the faces, yet only shape, the way faces look when the body discovers it has forgotten something important. The bow submerges to the sponsons. Water pours through doors that were minutes ago thresholds and now are mouths. A bosun frees a third boat and shoves. It kisses a wave and skitters outward. Oars grab an air, then water. The captain holds the turn as long as the rudder obeys and then knows by feel that he is no longer steering a ship but an idea of one. SF Hydro goes under at 10:30 a.m., bow first, the stern briefly pointing at a sky as pale as pewter. On the high side, crew and passengers clamber over the guard and walk the hull as if it were a hill. The cold takes breath like a thief when it finds skin. From farms along the far shore, boats push out men in knitted caps pulling at oars. A woman standing in a pram long enough to throw a rope like a coil of hay. You can be rescued from a lake like this if someone is close and the wind is kind. Today, both mercies arrive. And yet there is a count that cannot be argued down. 18 dead, 14 Norwegians and 4 German soldiers, and 29 survivors who will carry winter in their bones for the rest of their lives. In the hours after, rumors run the shoreline. Some swear they saw barrels floating, and a doubt blooms. Was the cargo real? The lake answers decades later, when divers find the wreck where the depth is a word you whisper and lift a barrel, stamp 26, and open it by science instead of gossip. The deuterium enrichment inside is exactly what the record said: heavy water, genuine. Enough to remove all ambiguity from a February morning when a ferry took on more weight than steel can bear. What left Mal did not reach Tinneset. The lake kept the Reich's chemistry and Telemark's grief for the rest of the war. At a small house up in the woods that evening, a man winds a pocket watch and sets it down next to a folded map and a pencil worn to a stub. He does not speak for a long time. When he finally does, it is to say a thing that sounds like a prayer but is really a reckoning. La de veri nok. Let it be enough. February 21 1944. Melkwe Telemark. Frost clings to the bollards where Hydro had lain the day before. A Feldgrau coat bends over a clipboard. A gendarme writes names that will never answer roll call again. A diver, faced raw with cold, reports what men along the shore already know. The lake is too deep for answers. The German officer signs the line anyway, as if ink could sound the bottom. A civilian superintendent talks of valves and ballast and weather. A clerk notes accident because there's no box to tick for a clock in the dark. In the station waiting room, families clutch scarves and thermoses and listen for the one name that isn't read. The stove ticks, the door opens and closes. The lake keeps its counsel. March 1944. A safe house above Rjukan. Knut Haukelid sits at a kitchen table with a pencil stub and a folded map. Beside the stove, boots steam gently, leather giving up the day. On the radio, London's Norwegian service rides the ionosphere into the room in a thin, brave voice. News is always a collage. Rumors stiffened into facts. Facts rounded into rumor. A neighbor was questioned. A watchman's statement was taken. The Germans added guards to the ferries that still run. Haukelid listens without moving. In a drawer, wrapped in oilcloth, lies the British number 10-time pencil he did not need. He closes the drawer softly, as one does when a house sleeps. Der 3. April 1945, Haigerloch, Württemberg. A different team moves under rock. Also is Colonel Boris Pash, physicist Samuel Goudsmit, and men with notebooks who think in half-lives and lattice spacing. The cave smells of wet stone and graphite. A squat vessel sits like a small boiler beneath a conical dome. Here, German physicists have suspended hundreds of uranium cubes on wires into a tank of heavy water, their poor man's moderator. Paraffin blocks and graphite walls once wrapped the assembly in a careful geometry. A cadmium blade for control, drums marked with codes, benches littered with calipers and logbooks in a precise hand, BV8, one sheet says. A designation that hums like a substation. The Americans photograph everything, then begin to lift the pieces into crates, U-metal cubes clinking softly, drums of captured D2O sloshing like a winter sea, notebooks that smell of dust and ambition. By evening, the cave is a memory with footprints. The 25th of April, 1945, along the Neckar. Trucks grind across a bridge under blackout paint. One carries a wooden chest, stenciled with numbers that once lived on blackboards. A sergeant wraps the lid with his knuckles and grins at the dull ring. Enough to make a chain? He asked no one in particular. Goudsmit, shoes white with limestone, answers without looking up from a ledger, not with the moderator they had. He doesn't mention Telemark by name. He doesn't have to. Everybody who reads the files will see what Norway wrote in its own script. Missing tons measured in a liquid that looks like nothing at all and weighs like a fate. The 8th of May, 1945, Oslo. Flags spill from windows. The king's photograph stands in shop fronts beside bread and roses. On a radio, a voice like a church bell says, "Freden, peace, and the city exhales." In a courtyard, a man in a denim jacket stares at his hands as if they belong to someone he's met in a dream. In Rjukan, workers walk past Vemork's high windows and smell hot oil and stone dust and the faint, sour breath of electrolyzers that won't hum again. A boy watches rescue trucks roll by and asks his mother if the lake will ever give back what it took. She says yes, because boys require it. July 1945. A house called Farm Hall, England. 9 German physicists stand still when the BBC crackles out the words atomic bomb. Heisenberg presses his knuckles to the glass. Gerlach stares at his shoes. Diebner lights a cigarette he won't smoke. They talk about cross-sections and reflectors and water that is heavy enough to bend a plant. Somewhere behind a wall, a microphone breathes in every word. The men argue over neutrons the way pilots argue over lift, and you can hear in the pauses how a program that once imagined itself a race had been, in truth, a long walk with missing steps. Someone says they never had enough of anything at the same time, enough U-metal, enough D2O, enough time. In Telemark, a ferry cabin lies in darkness a quarter-mile down, and the lake nods. Correct. 1965. Vemork becomes a museum. A guide points to a scale model of the electrolysis hall and tells a school class about a winter when men skied out of the dark and left a room full of metal to fall quiet. Little hands trace the bridge on the glass. A veteran in a wool suit stands at the back, face as familiar to the valley as the sawtooth of the ridge, and declines to speak. The class files past the Norsk Hydro logo and the old turbine hall. Outside, the gorge makes its constant sound, thin and cold as a tuning fork. History has the decency to echo 1993, 2005. The lake gives up a piece. ROVs and divers ride light down where hydro rests. Cameras show rivets furred with silt, the clean tear where steel once held against a February morning, rails that lead nowhere. A barrel comes up at last? No. 26, men say with a grin, as if lake and war were a game you could score. The lab says what the Saboteurs said with fuses and a clock. Deuterium-enriched water. Not rumor, not theater. In the museum, the barrel sits behind glass, a blunt gray cylinder with war inside it. Visitors lean close. Someone says, it looks like nothing. A docent says, that was the point. Oktober 30, 2018, Ålesund. Joachim Rønneberg's funeral cortege moves through streets washed clean by rain. On the steps of the church, caps come off. In the square, a child on her father's shoulders waves a small flag. A wreath sits heavy with spruce tips. Inside, voices rise the way. Wind rises along a ridge quietly at first, then strong. On a table near the aisle, a pair of mountain skis, scarred and waxed thin by use, lie crossed like parentheses that once held a winter. The Prime Minister speaks about courage that wears work clothes. In the back pew, a man who was once a boy in Rjukan and is now old enough to forget names remembers the sound a turbine makes through stone. If you want a number, this story can give you some. 31 drums that never reached Germany, 18 dead on a ferry that still crosses in dreams, 6 men in a cellar who made a room go quiet, 1 clock wound to give strangers a chance. But the ledger that matters is written in a different ink. The moment when a small country placed a hand on the world's shoulder and said, with patience and steel, not that way. June 20, 2015. Rjukan Gorge, Telemark. Rain needles the birch leaves as a class strings out along the narrow footpath above the river. Backpacks bump and jostle. A teacher counts heads against the green. The signboard calls it the Saboteur Trail, but the stones have their own names, places where a boot edge once slipped, where a rope once burned through a mitten. The guide carries a coil of line he won't need, and a laminated floor plan of a room that no longer hums. Here, he says, tapping the air in front of cliff and spray, is where the river noise swallows your heartbeat. Here's where you stop thinking and become movement. The children lean against a chain handrail and stare down into the black seam. Even with the plant quiet and the lights gone from the windows, the gorge has a voice. A long iron murmur like turbines, translated into water. They cross the suspension bridge single file. It sways the way bridges do when the valley wind has an opinion. Halfway, a boy freezes. The teacher's hand finds his elbow and stays. The guide speaks softly, engine lighter, and the boy's shoulders ease. On the far side, the group turns, and the guide points to a low, dark rectangle tucked into concrete. A service door, he says, the kind buildings forget about. He doesn't tell them about the padlock's small, damp click, or about the bulb that made eyelashes sparkle. Some things belong to the men who live them. He does tell them names, though, because names are the handholds of history. Joachim Rønneberg, Knut Haukelid, Fredrik Kayser, Birger Strømsheim, Casper Island, Hans Storhaug, and 4 from the earlier team who kept faith through a winter. Jens Anton Poulsen, Knut Haugelin, Klaus Helberg, Arne Kelstrup. The class repeats them under breath, as if testing a prayer. A winter morning with hard moon, no date given. A pair of skis waits against a farmhouse wall, tips crossed like fingers. Inside, an old man shows a grandson a pencil with a glass ampoule inside, the brass worn smooth by time and pockets. A clock you can fit in a glove, he says, and winds the imagination with his thumb. The boy flips the pencil over, sees the faint stamp, and asks if it really made the world change. The old man shakes his head. People did, he says, but this helped them keep their promise. A room of glass and light. On a plinth sits a gray cylinder with a stenciled number. People circle it as they might a campfire, faces lit from below by labels and memory. A docent rests her hand on the case and watches visitors' shoulders as the words land heavy water, deuterium, moderator terms that sound like the vocabulary of weather until you lay them against a calendar. 1943, 1944. It looks like nothing, someone says. The docent smiles. So did the men, she replies. On a screen at the back of the hall, a grainy film shows a ferry listing, a deck going from slant to slope, shoreline boats pushing out with oars that flash pale as fish. No music plays. The room supplies its own. Thamesford Meadow, England, a summer afternoon. A small stone and a flag. A memorial whose bronze glows dull under thumbprints. A father reads the plaque aloud. Special Operations Executive. Clandestine airfield. Lives measured by weather, windows, and moonlight. His daughter traces the winged sword and listens for engines on a wind that smells of cut grass. There's a list of names. And on another board, the word Scandinavia. And for a moment you can feel the weight of a rucksack you never carried. The sudden lurch of a slipstream. The cold that takes your breath and asks for your courage instead. Back in Telemark, a kitchen at dusk, a woman sets mugs on a table and waves her son and his friend toward the bench. They hike the trail each summer, racing the rain along the contour lines and daring each other to stand in the center of the bridge and look straight down. Tonight, the friend brings questions he has saved for weeks. Why didn't they shoot, he asks. 6 men in a room with soldiers sleeping. The woman shrugs, pours coffee, and chooses her words with the care of someone handling thin glass. Because a blown door brings more guns, she says. Because noise wakes fear. Because the point wasn't to win a fight, it was to break a machine. She pushes the sugar bowl forward as if it were the period at the end of a sentence. Ålesund harbor after rain. Tourists fold maps. Gulls argue on the roofline. A bronze saboteur figure holds a line taut that will never again pull tight. A man in his 30s, boots muddy, conference lanyard stuffed into a pocket stops and reads the inscription aloud. He grew up far away, but his grandfather's workshop had a shelf with wooden planes and an envelope of black and white photos. A young face in a knit cap, skis over a shoulder, a note on the back in neat pencil that said only, Telemark, winter. The man touches the bronze for luck and thinks about the ambiguous arithmetic of sabotage, how a choice can be both sharp and kind at the same time, how mercy can be measured in minutes, how a nation can say no with enough precision to matter. Rjukan, a night in February, any year. Snow ticks at the window. The gorge is a breathing thing. Somewhere above the valley, the trail lies white and waiting, stones asleep under drift, birch brushing the air like shoulders through a crowd. In the power plant's main hall, dark now but for safety lights, you can still imagine the turbines humming the jawbone song that guided 6 men to the door that mattered. Outside, a fox crosses the road in 3 neat leaps and disappears into fur. A train whistle from the far side of the lake becomes a memory you didn't know you had. What remains are human-scale facts, boot widths, breath counts, the weight of a satchel, the number of steps from a service door to a bank of steel. The seconds a clock will give a stranger to turn towards shore. In a century that learned to measure itself in millions and megatons, those small measures hold. They survive in rooms where children press noses to glass, on bridges that sway just enough to make your heart notice it is working. In stories told at kitchen tables, with the lamp turned low, they survive in the quiet, competent courage of people who chose the narrow path and did not miss their footing. The gorge keeps talking. The water does the patient work of forgetting and remembering at the same time. And if you stand on the trail long enough, boots damp, fingers burning back to life, you will hear it. The soft whisper of skis somewhere just out of sight, the low thrum of machines that no longer run, the clock click of a fuse that has already told its story, and the steady human answer to all of it not that way, spoken in a voice that is calm, firm, and free.